Hey everyone, it's James here from the DevGenie Academy, and in this episode we're going to be looking at mouse input. So as always, let's just dive right into it and begin. In our core package, create a new class called mouse input. We need a few variables first of all in the mouse input class. We need a private final vector 2D, which is a previous position, and a current position. That just allows us to compare the mouse position from what it was before to what it is now. We need a private final vector to f, which is a display or dispel vec. We also need a few booleans here as well. So the first one will be in window, which will default to false. We also need left button press, which again will default to false, and a right button pressed. Again, this will be defaulted to false too. So now we have the variables that we need, let's create the constructor. So that's public mouse input, not empty constructor, it doesn't need any properties added into it. So it's a previous position equals a new vector 2D, which will default to -1, -1. Current position, again, we'll default that to 0, 0. Display vector, which will just leave empty for now. But we also need a public void init method. Inside of the init method, we need a few callbacks. The first one is GLFW set cursor pos callback, and inside of here we need to pass in the window, so that's main.getWindow.getWindow handle, and we need to get outputs. So the first output is window, the second is xpos, and the last one is ypos. So we pass in the window and we get out the window, xpos and ypos. So we can then say the current position.x is equal to xpos, the y position is ypos. So the next one is GLFW set cursor entered callback. So again, it's passing in the window, and from the callback we get out the window and also a boolean whether the cursor has been entered. So simply all we need to do here is in window equals entered. And the last callback that we need here is a GLFW set mouse button callback. Again, we pass in the window from main.getWindow.getWindow handle, and the outputs is window, button, action, and also mode. So we can say the left button press is equal to button double equals GLFW mouse button 1, and action equals GLFW press. If we copy that, we can then say change that to the right button press and change the mouse button to mouse button 2. So then we can see if the left button's being pressed or the right button's being pressed. Next up, we need a public void input method, and we need to do displayVec.x equals 0, displayVec.y equals 0, and then we can say if the previous position.x is greater than 0 and the previous position.y is greater than 0, and finally if we are in the window. Inside of this if statement, let's create a double, and we'll call this x. This needs to equal current position.x negative the previous position.x, and we can copy that and change that to a y for the double, and then change the current position.x to y and previous position.y. And we also need a boolean there, so we can say rotate x, and that's going to equal x doesn't equal 0, and a boolean rotate y, and again that's going to equal y doesn't equal 0. So we can then do another if branch. We can then say if rotate x, then we say displayVec.y equals x. We need to cast that to a float, of course. Then we can say rotate y. So if we are rotating y, then we do displayVec.x equals y, and again we need to cast that to a float. So outside of the if statement now, we need to say previous position.x equals the current position.x, and previous position.y equals current position.y. So that's just so we can compare in the next input or the next update. So after we've done the input, all we need to do now is getters, and we just need them for the left and the right mouse button, and also the display vec as well. So back in the engine manager, we need to add an instance of the mouse input. We also need to create an instance of it in the init method, so that's mouse input equals a new mouse input. And after the window manager, we need to do mouse input.init, and if we scroll down to the input bit, we can then say mouse input.input, And in the update method of our test game, we pass in the float of interval and the mouse input as well. Obviously we need to then change that in our iGame logic and pass the mouse input there as well. And in the engine manager we can finally then add the mouse input to the update function as well. So going back to the test game, we can test that this is all working now. And we can say mouse if mouse input is right mouse button pressed. So if we're pressing the right mouse button, we can create a rotate vector of vector2, which is mouse input.getDisplayVec. And then we can say camera.move rotation by rotate vector.x and rotate vector.y. And then we just pass 0 as the last parameter. Now we also need to do something similar like we did with the camera move position. So in our constant class we can then create a public static final float, and let's call this mouse sensitivity. Okay, and I'm going to set mine to 0.2f, but of course you can set it to whatever you'd like. So in the test class now we can then say rotate vector.x multiplied by the const of mouse sensitivity, and then we can do that with the rotate vector.y. Obviously we don't need to do that with the z component. So now all going well, now we can test the application and we can see that if we right mouse click and move the mouse around, we can then rotate the screen. But thanks very much for watching everyone, I hope you enjoyed, and if you do have any questions please leave them down in the comments below, and I'll see you next week.